Well, ladies and gentlemen, and now for something completely different. We are going to go from talking about civil rights to talking about the Commission on Civil Rights. So maybe a little navel-gazing. But let me get started here. If the value of a federal agency can be calculated on a per-dollar basis, it would not surprise me to find that the Commission on Civil Rights has been among the best investments Congress has ever made. My back-of-the-envelope calculation is that the Commission now accounts for less than 1/2000th of 1% of the federal budget. Back in the 1950s, it wasn't very different. That was when the Commission was founded, of course. And yet its impact, at least in those early years, we'll talk about the later years a little bit later, but its impact in those early years was dramatic. I am by no means alone in believing that without the groundwork that the Commission laid back in those early years, there could have been no Voting Rights Act of 1965, no Fair Housing Act of 1968, and even the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would not have been very easy without the work that the Commission was doing during that period. In other words, there would not have been a civil rights revolution as we know it today without that work. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about whether the Commission is still delivering value. And I will shortly be introducing you to three distinguished panelists to debate that issue. And you're going to see that the Commission is either very confident of its value or very suicidal because we have stacked the deck against us. We have two speakers who I think are generally going to be on the side of critics of the Commission, and only one defender perhaps here, but maybe they'll change their minds as they're speaking, we'll see. So I think this is going to be very interesting. But allow me to lay just a little bit of historical groundwork before we go to our speakers. The Commission is celebrating its 53rd anniversary this year, but in my view at least, there have been two commissions over the years, not just one, and I think it's valuable to make a distinction between the two commissions that have existed and the two laws that created them. The first was, of course, the one created by the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and that act, for those of you who don't follow these things, was the very first civil rights legislation passed by Congress since the Reconstruction era. So there was a long period where civil rights was not on the congressional agenda. Some people like to look back at the 57 Act and characterize it as a weak act because it didn't confer any new rights. But I prefer to see it as a vital building block. It created two very important institutions, the Commission and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. You heard Dr. Moses describe during the previous panel how Civil Rights Division attorneys were very helpful in being the get-out-of-jail card for some of the greatest heroes of the civil rights movement. I actually had lunch over the weekend with an early staff attorney from the Commission, and he was telling me stories that as a Commission staff attorney, he was also going down to prisons in the Deep South and getting civil rights activists out of prison. But that was not the main function of the Commission. I like to think of that early commission as the fact-finding commission. As then-Senator and Majority Leader Lyndon Baines Johnson put it, the Commission's task was, and here's the quote, to gather facts instead of charges. He said, it can sift out the truth from fancies, and it can return with recommendations that will be of assistance to reasonable men. Well, people today sometimes don't realize that some basic facts were in fact in dispute in the 1950s and early 60s. Not everyone agreed, for example, that blacks in the South were being systematically prevented from voting on the basis of their skin color. They thought that literacy tests were being fairly and even-handedly administered, and that these literacy tests were, perhaps a good idea. It wasn't clear in 1957 that it would be necessary or even desirable to keep the commission going indefinitely. It was commissioned, among other things, to figure out just who was registering to vote and who was being prevented from registering to vote during that period. But in 1983, Congress reconfigured the commission just a bit, and most important, it added independence to the commission. There had been a dispute at the time about whether or not commissioners could be fired by the president. And Congress stepped in, created a different commission, and created 6-year terms for commissioners, made them independent of both Congress and the president, and the focus changed too. Congress directed the commission to write a yearly report on civil rights law enforcement. The 57 Act didn't talk about civil rights law enforcement because there were no civil rights laws to enforce at the time, but by 1983 there certainly were. And that fact-finding commission turned into what I call a watchdog commission, an independent body composed of 8 commissioners who work part-time, beholden to no one. At least that's the ideal. We on the commission have day jobs that don't depend on civil rights policy as usual. I, for example, am a law professor. Several members of the commission are lawyers. We have a social scientist. We have one tribal leader, and one recent member was a stay-at-home mother. That allows us some independence and outlook that may be more difficult for people who work within the federal bureaucracy, people who work in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, people who work for the EEOC, and for that matter, people who work for traditional mainstream civil rights organizations. We on the commission hope and like to think that on those occasions where the emperor has no clothes, that we will be among the first to notice. We'll talk about whether it's working out that way, because along with an independent commission, we also have a very contentious commission. We also have sometimes, in our worst moments, a somewhat chaotic commission. But we have our good moments too. But I'm going to leave it to our speakers to tell us about both the good and the bad. We have today 3 speakers, and they are going to speak in this order. First, we're going to hear from Russell Redenbaugh. Russell Redenbaugh is currently a portfolio manager at Kairos Capital Advisors, and previously, from 1969 to 1999, he was a partner at Cook & Beeler Incorporated, a Philadelphia-based investment management firm. Oh, I'm just getting started. I'm just getting started here, because what we care about is the fact that you were a member of the Commission on Civil Rights for 15 years, I believe. And most importantly, for those who like to be entertained by these bios, is the fact that in 2003, 2004, and 2005, Commissioner Redenbaugh won the gold medal in the World Jiu-Jitsu competition held in Brazil. Then we're going to have Mindy Berry. Mindy Berry is a litigator in private practice in Michigan and is an adjunct professor at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. She served as chief counsel, Oversight and Investigations for the United States House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary, where her jurisdiction included oversight of the activities of the Civil Rights Division and the Commission. She was also active in oversight of civil rights legislation, including the Voting Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Then we will have Ken Marcus. Ken Marcus holds the Lilly and Nathan Ackerman Chair in Equality and Justice in America at the City University of New York's Bernard M. Baruch College School of Public Affairs. He also directs the Initiative on Anti-Semitism and Anti-Israelism at the Institute for Jewish and Community Research in San Francisco. But before joining Baruch College, Ken served as the staff director at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and prior to that, he was delegated the authority of Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights.